Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, a small town in Stormont County, Ontario. Little is known about his family and early life. He remained single and childless, working as a gas station attendant and a security guard on film sets. Those who knew him described Adam as quirky and eccentric, often coming across as superior to others. He enjoyed debating and arguing to prove his point, but was not typically confrontational. A review of his social media profiles revealed Adam's interest in BDSM practices, which he openly discussed and shared photos and videos about. Although he never had a long-term partner, some former partners accused him of being a sadist who subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, leading to the end of their relationships. Adam also had a peculiar hobby of writing reviews of adult films and magazines. It appeared that watching such content was a significant part of his free time. Despite his unusual interests, Adam presented himself as a calm and composed individual, showing no outward signs of a troubled or criminal nature. The story took an unexpected turn 4 months later when at the end of December, when David Wood's family moved into the house at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa, they were immediately struck by a strange and unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, Adam Strong, a 45-year-old single man who lived in the other half of the house, reassured them that it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix within a few days. Although Adam was friendly and polite in his communication, there was something unsettling about him that put the Wood family on edge. When David's wife tried to welcome him with some homemade cookies, Adam wouldn't even let her into his apartment. Instead, he stepped out into the hallway, closing his door behind him. In that brief moment, David's wife caught a glimpse of Adam's living space, which was in disarray, and the smell inside was overpowering and foul. Adam borrowed cookies from his new neighbor and quickly left. Later, when they met in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that his apartment was a mess due to upcoming renovations. Despite his efforts to be polite, he seemed nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore a persistent smell. However, on December 29th, they called a plumber to fix a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. The problem seemed minor, but what the workers found in the pipes shocked even experienced forensic experts. Plumber Sean Funn and his partner began to clear the blockage in the Woods' apartment. Although they were accustomed to unpleasant odors, they were surprised by the terrible smell inside. They soon realized they needed to investigate further and descended to the apartment below, which belonged to a man named Adam. Adam reluctantly let the workers in, apologizing for the mess. The smell was even worse in his apartment, and when the plumbers reached the source of the blockage, the stench became unbearable. Sean, a seasoned plumber, had never encountered anything as foul-smelling as this in his years of practice. However, an even more disturbing discovery awaited him and his team when they decided to clear the pipe. Adam, already on edge, became increasingly agitated, refusing to step away and bombarding the workers with questions about their methods and estimated time of completion. He later claimed he was simply curious, having never witnessed this process before. The specialists tried to brush off his behavior, but their efforts were soon overshadowed by the gruesome discovery of over 10 kilograms of flesh, hair, and bone fragments in the pipes. Sean was horrified to find disfigured and partially decomposed human fingers among the debris. Adam feigned surprise, claiming he had never seen anything so disgusting, and then asked the plumbers if they had any idea how this could have ended up in the sewer pipe. Sean decided to call the police immediately to report the disturbing discovery. He informed them that he had likely found human remains and provided the address. He made sure Adam didn't touch or disturb anything, preserving the evidence. When the officers arrived, they quickly confirmed that Sean's suspicions were correct. Human flesh had been extracted from the pipes. The police then spoke with the Adam. He admitted that a woman's body had been stuck in the pipe. He even revealed that other body parts were stored in his refrigerator's freezer. Upon investigation, the police found a severed head and limb fragments packed in plastic bags, which were too large. The house was extremely filthy and cluttered, with a kitchen filled with dirty dishes and rotting food, as well as trash covering the floor. Empty pizza boxes were scattered around, and numerous magazines of an explicit and masochistic nature were present among the mess. Various adult toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and restraint devices were also discovered. Adam Strong was arrested at the scene and taken to the police station for questioning. His arrest puzzled the authorities, as he had no prior run-ins with the law and was not a person of interest to the police. Mr. Adam had resided at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa for over 10 years, dating back to 2007, without incident or complaints from neighbors. The House of Horrors at 19 Macmillan Drive, Adam's residence, was secured and guarded as a crime scene. An initial inspection revealed a complex and time-consuming process lay ahead, with investigators expecting to uncover more shocking evidence. The discovery of a head in the refrigerator was just the beginning. Evidence found at the scene led law enforcement to suspect a connection to Rory Hash, whose torso had been recovered from a body of water 4 months earlier. A tattoo on the neck and subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that the discovered remains belonged to Rory. Further investigation revealed blood-stained clothing and shoes belonging to she, hidden among trash in various rooms of the house. The bedroom was particularly disturbing, with blood traces found on the bed, walls, furniture, and ceiling. These bloodstains were later confirmed to belong to a missing schoolgirl. A dissection table was also found in the kitchen, suggesting it was used to dismember and gut the victim. The entire scene was gruesome, with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments scattered everywhere, causing nausea in those who witnessed it. The bathroom was extremely dirty and unsanitary, with signs of a violent crime visible everywhere, including dirt, blood, and broken fixtures. The toilet was dismantled and lay in a corner, surrounded by garbage. It appeared that the perpetrator, Adam, had attempted to dispose of a body by cutting it into pieces and flushing them down the sewer. However, he encountered a blockage and, when his attempt to fix it failed, left the scene in disarray. Inside the house, a large number of sharp objects were discovered, which likely had been used to dismember the victim. Some of the objects, including knives, still had blood on them. Further analysis of the evidence, including DNA samples, revealed that Adam had semen on fragments of the victim's body, which had been found in the refrigerator. Rory Hash was born on July 9, 1999, in Oshawa, Ontario, to Shannon Dion, a single mother. Rory's father was not present in her life, having left before her birth. Despite this, Rory grew up in a loving and supportive family environment provided by her mother and maternal grandmother. Rory's family had an unconventional background, with her maternal grandfather founding and leading the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. He was also a skilled boxer with connections to organized crime. Additionally, Rory's uncle was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club and led a troubled life, frequently encountering legal issues. However, this did not affect Rory's childhood, which was remarkably peaceful and carefree. Rory excelled academically and had a passion for dance, winning awards in competitions. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, responsible, and compassionate. At the age of 13, Rory earned top honors as a cadet in her local army unit, showcasing her exceptional qualities from a young age. At 15, Rory's life took a downward turn. A friend introduced her to drugs, and she quickly became addicted. She started spending time with the wrong crowd, neglected her schoolwork, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, her family tried to help her overcome her addiction by sending her to various treatment centers, but she relapsed each time. At 17, Rory ran away from home and began working in the sex trade to support her habit. Rory eventually sought help from a specialized service for teenagers struggling with addiction. With their support, she was able to enter mandatory treatment and turn her life around. She found a job at a local shop, studied remotely to earn her high school diploma, and even started thinking about attending college. Rory also started a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony, and they decided to move in together in the spring of 2017. When Rory discovered she was pregnant, she was nearly 18 and felt ready to take on the responsibility of motherhood. Her mother supported her decision, but was unaware that Rory had started using illicit substances again. In mid-August, Rory met with Crane at a shopping center. Crane had been keeping an eye on her for 18 months to ensure she didn't fall back into her old habits. During their meeting, Rory revealed that she had started using drugs again and had lost her job a month prior. She also admitted to exchanging intimate favors for money or drugs. Crane was deeply concerned and promised to help. He asked Rory to wait while he made a call to arrange for her to be hospitalized. However, when he returned, Rory was gone. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her in a state of incoherence due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue for about an hour, but when they returned, Rory was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed that she had simply gotten up and walked out of the hospital. Her family reported her missing the following day, but despite a thorough search and widespread social media attention, Rory was never seen again. Rory's exact circumstances of arrival at Adam's house are unknown, but it is probable that she went there seeking drugs in exchange for sex. The investigation started when Adam informed the police about the location of Rory's remaining body parts. Initially, investigators anticipated Adam would admit to the crime, but when he was taken to the station, he became uncooperative, refused to answer questions, and denied any involvement in Rory's death, all while remaining calm. The only charge filed against Adam was desecration of a body, as there was not enough direct evidence to link him to the murder. Despite his lawyer's efforts, Adam was not granted bail and stayed in jail until his trial. Investigators attempted to get Adam to reveal more information by provoking an emotional response, but he remained cautious and avoided discussing Rory's visit to his house and his potential involvement in her death. However, Adam freely talked about his interest in bladed weapons and his large collection of knives. A search of Adam's house uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a dirty hunting knife hidden in a closet with dried skin fragments that appeared to be human. DNA testing revealed that the samples on the knife did not match Rory's, but belonged to someone else. It took several months to identify the person, but by July 2017, investigators had confirmed that the DNA on the knife belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, she who had gone missing about 10 years earlier. Candace shared many similarities with Rory Hash. Both struggled with addiction and had run-ins with the law. They came from troubled families and often ran away from home, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. To survive, they would often exchange sex for food and other necessities. Candace was born in 1989 and was 18 when she disappeared. Her family did not realize she was missing until almost 2 years later, by which time any potential leads had gone cold. Many people believed that Candace's lifestyle and social circle meant she could have gone anywhere. For 10 years, her parents thought she might have run away and would eventually return home. However, news from law enforcement in 2018 destroyed their hope of ever seeing their daughter alive again. A striking feature of the case was the physical resemblance between Candace and another victim, who was the same age. The police believed they had caught a serial offender. The suspect, Adam, also confessed to harming Candace. However, Adam refused to provide information about Rory unless the police agreed to improve his prison conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet, and his favorite meals. Although law enforcement was outraged by Adam's demands, they agreed in order to gain valuable information. Adam began by sharing his troubled childhood, revealing that he was abused by his stepfather from age 5 and started harming animals at age 7, deriving physical pleasure from these acts. He also discussed his unusual intimate preferences and expressed frustration at not finding a partner who shared these interests. When discussing Rory, Adam described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in the act, but later regretted his plumbing had failed him. However, when questioned by police, Adam denied responsibility for her death, claiming she had died from an overdose and he had only disposed of the body. When asked about Candace, a case from 10 years prior, Adam was caught off guard and attempted to learn how the police had discovered the connection. Upon hearing about the human remains found on an old knife, Adam became subdued and regretted not taking better precautions to avoid detection. He admitted to meeting Candace but denied killing her. Despite a lack of evidence to support his claims, Adam unintentionally incriminated himself during the investigation. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he shared his account of events. However, when informed that the victim, Rory, was pregnant at the time of her death, Adam strongly denied this fact. The police noted that the pregnancy was in its early stages, and therefore not visibly apparent. Adam claimed that he would have noticed if she was pregnant, sparking a realization among the investigators that he would stop at nothing to argue his point. To uncover more information, the police told Adam that Rory was pregnant, which led him to attempt to prove the contrary. In his eagerness to refute this, he shared graphic details about how he had personally examined her body and held her reproductive organs in his hands. Adam's account was detailed and included his physical sensations, describing the flesh as soft and warm. At one point, he even mentioned feeling a pulse. These statements raised suspicions that Rory may have still been alive at the time. Unfortunately for Adam, his entire narrative was captured on camera, and his incriminating statements were presented as evidence in court. When confronted about his earlier statements, Adam tried to retract his previous admissions, but it was too late. The defendant, Adam Strong, refused to reveal what he had done with Candace's body, and despite extensive searches, her remains were never found. Investigators also failed to identify any other potential victims. During one of the final interrogations, Strong showed no remorse, saying, "I don't know if it matters, but I'd like to extend my condolences to her parents." During the trial, Strong's lawyers argued that he was mentally ill and therefore not responsible for his actions, claiming he needed medical treatment rather than punishment. However, the court had to decide whether he was sane and accountable for his crimes or if he should be committed to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. A psychiatric evaluation found that although Strong had certain mental health disorders, he was aware of his actions and could be held legally responsible. Strong's trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace disappeared. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted guilt, the evidence found in his home and his statements during interrogations confirmed his involvement in these horrific crimes. 4 of Adam's former partners testified against him, describing his cruel and violent behavior. The prosecution presented evidence that Adam had lured 2 women to his home with promises of money in exchange for intimate services that catered to his specific preferences. Once they were in his home, he would immobilize and torment them for an extended period. In the case of Rory, he likely killed her during the ordeal because he feared she would report him to the police. On September 4th, a signal from Adam's phone was detected near the city harbor, where he had discarded Rory's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was found guilty of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, as well as desecrating Rory's remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Adam showed little remorse, stating that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months after his sentencing, Adam unexpectedly revealed the location of Candace's remains. Following his directions, the police conducted a months-long search that ultimately led to the discovery of human bones. DNA testing confirmed the skeleton's identity as young Candace Fitzpatrick, and this was officially announced. Investigators now strongly suspect that there may be at least one more female victim in the Adam case. During Adam's initial interrogation, his personal belongings were seized, including a chain with 3 rings. Adam asked for the chain's return, explaining that the rings held sentimental value and he didn't want to lose them. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their daughters, but the origin of the 3rd ring remains unknown. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Trevone Miller. Brayla Stone, a 17-year-old girl from North Little Rock, Arkansas, was one of the most vibrant individuals in the Sherwood suburbs. Those close to her knew her as a cheerful and outgoing teenager with big dreams. She was an active user of social media, particularly Instagram, where she had amassed a following due to her excellent sense of humor. Despite facing negative reactions from some members of the community due to her being transgender, this did not diminish Brayla's pride in herself. She stood up against anyone who spoke or acted negatively towards her or her lifestyle. Instead, she embraced herself confidently and strongly, allowing nothing to hinder her path. Brayla enjoyed expressing her femininity both online and in real life. This was not only about how she dressed or wore makeup, but also about how she behaved and interacted with others. She knew that confidence did not come from holding an image others desired, but from how one accepts and loves oneself. Life was not always smooth and easy, but Brayla remained steadfast in her belief and her dreams. She believed that one day, the stage lights would shine on her, and she would stand under those lights proudly, showing the world who she was. Brayla was a strong and wonderful girl, and we use the pronoun she to refer to her as an acknowledgement and respect for her. In 2016, Brayla began an intimate relationship with a teenager named Trevone Hayes Miller. At that time, Trevone was working at a local Arby's and was just 18 years old. However, Trevone had a troubled past. He had been involved in a murder case at the age of 14 and had ties to a criminal gang. In April 2016, Trevone, along with 2 older teenagers, planned to rob another teenager named Brian Thompson, a 17-year-old marijuana dealer. The trio lured Brian to the parking lot of a local entertainment center with a promise to buy from him. Trevone carried a BB gun in his pocket, while one of his companions had a real handgun. As Brian was making the transaction, the oldest teen suddenly exited the passenger seat of the car and shot Brian in the neck, then stole $15 from him. Following the shooting, the group fled the scene. In the tragic death of Brian, we can see the cruelty and guilt in Trevone and his group's actions. It is evident that Trevone is not a good person. He is a criminal. This raises the question of why Brayla would date someone like Trevone. It is possible that Brayla was unaware of Trevone's criminal past, or there may be other unknown factors in their relationship. People have their preferences, interests, and choices, and sometimes relationships are not based on conventional standards. However, the attraction of some young women to boys with a bad past is not a universal rule. Each woman has her own choices and criteria in seeking a partner. The police found about a pound of marijuana in the car and arrested all 3 individuals within a day, less than 24 hours after the shooting. All 3 were caught after being recorded on a security camera near the crime scene. Trevone was eventually charged with aggravated robbery in a juvenile court. Initially, he faced a murder charge, but Trevone agreed to cooperate with investigators and testify against his accomplices, helping to reduce his charges. Although Trevone was never required to testify because his friends admitted their guilt, he was prepared to reveal text messages in court showing that he was the mastermind behind the robbery plan. Despite being the youngest in the group, Originally, Trevone wanted the robbery to take place in an old abandoned house they had previously used as a hideout. However, the only consequence for Trevone was a short time in a juvenile detention center, while his two older accomplices were charged and sentenced and remain in custody to this day. In 2019, Trevone was arrested again for robbery and impersonating a criminal in the second degree. This time, he impersonated a security guard at a Walmart store and tried to rob two customers in the parking lot. Just a few months later, he was arrested again on another weapons-related charge. Unfortunately, these chances for rehabilitation did not put him on a better path. Instead, they led to a tragedy that resulted in the untimely death of a young victim. In 2020, Trevone and Brayla were in a romantic relationship that was sexual in nature. Despite Brayla's confidence and self-acceptance as a transgender woman, she faced discrimination and harassment. Recognizing that not everyone was as open-minded, Brayla agreed to keep the relationship private to protect Trevone. However, Trevone's reluctance to go public was rooted in his own fear of societal backlash and the consequences it might bring. Rather than being honest with Brayla about his concerns, Trevone took advantage of her empathetic nature to shield himself from potential repercussions. Brayla and Trevone's mutual understanding began to break down when she found out he was secretly involved with another. This betrayal made Brayla feel uncomfortable and angry, prompting her to threaten to reveal their relationship. In response, Trevone offered to pay her off to keep quiet. Fear consumed Trevone, leading him to think negatively and act toxically. Rather than facing the consequences of his actions and taking responsibility, he tried to cut Brayla out of his life to keep their relationship a secret. Trevone confessed to his 19-year-old mistress that he was contemplating murdering Brayla to keep their illicit affair hidden. However, the young woman didn't take Trevone's ominous warnings seriously. Assuming he only made such threats when he was angry, she attempted to pacify him, hoping the situation would resolve itself without incident. Shortly after the phone call, Brayla arrived at Trevone's house, a fact verified by a friend who was on the phone with her while she waited for Trevone to answer the door. Following a 5-hour meeting with Trevone, Brayla sent a text to her friend expressing her dissatisfaction and mentioning that they had been arguing for hours. Brayla was never heard from again after this incident. The next morning, on June 25th, a passerby contacted the police to report a dead body in a park in Sherwood, a suburb of North Little Rock. The police found Brayla's body in a black Saturn Vue parked on a gravel path near 7224 Vista Point Court, which is visible from Gap Creek Drive. At the time her body was discovered, Brayla had already been reported missing to the North Little Rock police. When the police arrived, they discovered 17-year-old Brayla in an abandoned car along the gravel path, having been shot fatally in the head. Brayla was found with a gunshot wound through the head, her body positioned upside down on the front passenger floor with her legs on the back of the seat. The driver's side window was shattered. According to police reports, there were signs of blood inside the car and a strong smell of bleach. Investigators also noticed discoloration from cleaning agents on some of the car's interior. The news of Brayla's tragic death spread across media outlets. Notably, her family requested that all articles and segments about Brayla's story refer to her using the pronouns he and the name given to her at birth, despite the preferences she clearly expressed in the years before her death. It's evident that Brayla and her family were not on the same page, and they did not support her true identity, even in her absence. This is truly a heartbreaking tragedy. Even in her obituary, an old image of Brayla before her transition was used, evoking a deep sense of disappointment and regret. Instead of honoring and respecting her true self, her family chose to present images of a past that Brayla had overcome and sought to change. This reflects the negative aspects of a society still reluctant to accept and respect individual diversity and identity. It highlights a sense of injustice and pain as a person who, with all their efforts and courage to become the best version of themselves, is still undermined and overlooked. It's not just Brela's death that is mourned, but also the sorrow for a society still rife with prejudice and discrimination. Following Brela's death, a provocative Instagram post emerged claiming responsibility for her murder in exchange for $5,000. The user, Tappan Season, even posted a photo of a $100 bill as supposed proof. However, after 24 hours of intense backlash, the user confessed that they were, in reality, a 15-year-old seeking attention and had fabricated the entire story. This reckless and inexcusable act caused unnecessary confusion, grief, and fear within the community, particularly among Brela's family and friends. The lack of prompt police action against the imposter further exacerbated feelings of insecurity and frustration. Although the teenager may avoid legal repercussions, the gravity of their actions remains severe. It is hoped that as they mature, they will come to understand the gravity of their behavior and learn from this experience, eventually becoming responsible adults who respect others and value integrity. It took the police 7 days to catch Trevone. According to the arrest report, Trevone became a prime suspect for the Sherwood police soon after the incident. A friend of Brela's had informed the police that Brela was with Trevone on the night she was murdered. This friend also revealed that the location where Brela's body was found was a spot Trevone often visited for secret meetings, which was near his home in Sherwood. Additionally, Trevone's manager at Arby's quickly contacted the police after Trevone called her following his shift on the day Brela died. Trevone told his manager that he was overwhelmed, had messed up, and wouldn't be returning to work for a long time. When the manager asked Trevone what he meant, he just said she would find out soon enough. As soon as the manager heard about Brela's body being discovered, she informed the authorities. Eventually, on August 3rd, Trevone was taken into custody. In court, the prosecutor claimed that Trevone murdered Brela to silence her and prevent her from revealing their secret sexual relationship. Apparently, Brela had discovered that Trevone was simultaneously dating another woman and had threatened to expose their past intimacy in public. Fearing that people would think he was gay, Trevone allegedly bribed Brela to keep quiet about their relationship. When he was 19, Trevone was accused of the murder after he called his manager at Arby's, showing remorse for his actions. "I'm in big trouble, and it's all over for me," he said. "I've really messed up, and I won't be coming back for a very long time." Trevone pleaded guilty in a deal that reduced his sentence. He was initially facing a murder charge, which carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment or the death penalty. However, he reached a plea agreement to avoid these penalties. Notably, the investigation revealed similarities between Brela's murder and another case, the April 2016 killing of 17-year-old Brian Allen Thompson at the Bill Harmon Recreation Center in Sherwood. Thompson was found shot in the neck, dead behind the wheel of his car, by a center employee. Trevone was one of 3 teenagers charged in Thompson's death. Detective Craig Grisham of Sherwood observed that in both cases, the shooter fired from the passenger seat, which prevented the victim in the driver's seat from escaping quickly. Grisham also noted that both murders occurred at locations near Trevone's residence, allowing for an easy escape from the scene without detection, as stated in the arrest affidavit. Trevone Hayes Miller, 20, has been sentenced to 40 years in prison for first-degree murder, plus an additional 10 years for using a firearm, following the fatal shooting of 17-year-old Brela Stone in Sherwood, a suburb of North Little Rock, on June 25th, just days before her 18th birthday. Miller has been imprisoned since his arrest about a week after the murder and must serve 35 years before being eligible for parole, which means he will be 53 years old by the time he is eligible for early release. As part of a plea agreement negotiated by his attorney, Burke Moore, and Deputy Prosecutor John Johnson, the murder charge was reduced. Brela was among the 44 known transgender individuals in the U.S. who lost their lives to violence in 2020, marking the highest annual toll on record. Unfortunately, This alarming trend persists, with 34 fatalities already reported this year. It's likely that the actual number of victims is even higher, as some cases may have been misreported or underreported due to misidentification of the victims' names or genders by police or the media. Transgender activists, notably journalist Ashley Marie Preston, demanded attention to the murder of Brayla and urged for immediate action. They also implored the media to respect the family's request and use Brayla's birth name instead of her preferred name. Tonight, local groups are organizing a candlelight vigil in her memory at Bowl Park in Little Rock. Furthermore, a petition on change.org has gathered over 100,000 signatures. John emphasized that the tragic and often silent losses of Black transgender people, gay individuals, and non-binary persons, as well as the ongoing struggles of Black girls, will not go unnoticed, especially as we commemorate 51 years of pride and resistance that began at Stonewall. Meanwhile, mostly white reporters and media outlets led by white individuals are publishing reflective pieces that focus on the benefits gained by white gay people. Yet Black lives, particularly those of Black transgender women and girls, continue to be put at risk as people demand policy and practice changes that recognize and protect them. Following the tragic death of Brayla, local LGBTQ+ supporters in Central Arkansas came together to hold vigils in her memory. The Art Revolution Center, a Little Rock-based organization that focuses on youth, paid tribute to Brayla as someone who always made sure others felt comfortable being themselves and expressing their identities. The center invited those mourning her loss to wear her favorite colors, red and purple, as a way to honor her. Brayla's life was tragically cut short at the tender age of 17. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Austin Harf. The case of Austin Harf, a handsome, high-achieving youth who turned into a cannibal. Experts say mental disorders can stem from genetics, trauma, substance abuse, or isolation. Harf's case stands out. He suffers from a rare condition where he believes he's transforming into an animal. But some think he feigned insanity to avoid responsibility, as he admitted using drugs for a long time. Now, let's explore how the scion of a wealthy and respected family, an honor student and an athlete, became a drug-dependent madman with an insatiable craving for human flesh. Austin Malcolm Harf, the Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996 in Palm Beach, Florida, to a prominent family of doctors. The Harf family lived in a lavish oceanfront residence, and a year and a half later, welcomed a daughter, Haley, with whom Austin shared a close bond. Despite their privileged upbringing, the children were not spoiled. Their parents provided them with quality education and supported their holistic growth and creative potential. Austin was an excellent student, passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and theater. He saw himself as creative and ambitious. Along with his family, he traveled the world. In high school, he described himself as a happy, optimistic person with a vivid imagination and perseverance in academics and sports, though he acknowledged his shyness. When Austin turned 13, his parents decided to separate. His father left the family home and moved into an equally luxurious residence with his new romantic partner, who soon became his wife. The children remained with their mother, but their father continued to be actively involved in their upbringing and provided financial support. Soon, Austin's mother also found a new partner, marrying him within a year, and he moved into their home. The teenage boy struggled with his parents' divorce, but it's worth noting that his emotional turmoil did not affect his academic performance or athletic achievements. Dreaming of a career in medicine to follow in his parents' footsteps, Austin aspired to help and save lives, aiming to gain admission to a prestigious college specializing in medical studies. He grew tall, boasted a muscular build, and was quite strong. His charming smile and innocent, open gaze gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he remained the same shy guy, which hindered his ability to socialize with peers and form romantic relationships with girls. In his personal diary, written during his teenage years, he expressed having almost no friends in school, as all his classmates labeled him a nerd and mocked him. He also expressed hope that everything would change for the better when he went to college, changed his social circle, and moved out of his parents' house. A few months before finishing high school, Austin discovered he had been admitted to the prestigious University of Florida's 4-year medical program. Successful completion of this program would open wide career prospects for him in the future, as well as the opportunity to continue his education at any medical school in the United States. The student was incredibly happy as his dream had come true. Towards the end of August, his parents drove him to the college campus where he was to begin his studies. Opening up in a vlog, Austin embarked on the independent adult life he had eagerly awaited, yet little changed for him. Due to his shyness, he still struggled to connect with his peers. He briefly dated a lovely girl, but they soon parted ways because, as she put it, something about his behavior alarmed her, leading her to end the relationship. In his first year of university, Austin took a serious interest in bodybuilding, spending a lot of time in the gym and achieving impressive results. He developed well-defined muscles that looked very impressive. However, his success was not solely the result of perseverance and hard work. The use of steroids, which he began using regularly, also played a role. He openly shared this in his vlog on YouTube, which he started in the spring of 2016. Austin posted various videos on his channel. Some discussed sports and bodybuilding in particular, while others featured him singing with a guitar, doing cover versions of popular hits, or mimicking famous artists by copying their performance style. Still others were about himself and his philosophical musings on life. Over time, however, his postings became increasingly alarming. He started urging his followers never to use steroids, claiming they could drive a person insane. He also said he had a volatile and unpredictable nature and was confused by his own behavior. Austin began recording videos speaking in different accents, as if they were different personas. At times, he would change the tone of his voice or suddenly burst into tears for no apparent reason. His mood and facial expressions also underwent strange transformations, at times appearing as if he was simply making faces at the camera. Later, experts who reviewed his postings concluded that in each one, he was virtually pleading for help. For him, this blog became the only outlet and a way to express his feelings, as he failed to make any real friends during his studies. Moreover, these video recordings traced how the student gradually lost his sanity, with his behavior becoming more sensational, provocative, and even aggressive. Austin's subscribers suspected he was under the influence of controlled substances while recording his videos. They directly asked him about this in the comments, but he replied that it would be unhealthy and, as an athlete, he would never use drugs. However, his behavior suggested otherwise, and one of the subscribers even speculated that Austin might have a dissociative identity disorder. When Austin returned home for the summer break, his mother and sister, who hadn't seen him in almost a year and hadn't watched his blog online, were literally shocked by the changes in him. During that time, Austin had undergone a significant physical transformation, turning into a veritable mountain of muscle. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. He became odd in every sense, speaking nonsense and claiming he no longer needed sleep. Initially, his family didn't take his words seriously until the night came. Austin declared he would patrol the house, guarding his family's peace from some dark forces, and he indeed kept his promise, wandering around the house until morning. Moreover, every hour he would check on his mother and sister's rooms, loudly assuring them they could sleep peacefully because he was on duty. The next morning, Austin's mother decided to have an honest conversation with him. She directly asked if he was using any drugs. Austin candidly admitted that he had tried virtually all drugs over the past year, and he even described how each one affected him. Among other things, he had taken a potent synthetic drug that caused severe hallucinations, fits of rage, and could lead to a fatal overdose. Nevertheless, he swore to his mother that it was all in the past, and he no longer touched the poison that had driven him insane. After hearing her son out, Mrs. Austin made what was perhaps the main mistake. She did not seek help from qualified professionals, deciding she could help her son cope on her own, being an experienced pharmacist. She took matters into her own hands. She gave her son a sedative and a sleeping pill, thinking it would help him relax and fall asleep after a sleepless night. However, Austin, after dozing off for just a couple of hours, was back on his post by night. He resumed patrolling the house until morning, informing its inhabitants every hour that all was quiet and there was no need to worry. This went on for several weeks. But the mother still refused to involve psychiatrists or even inform her ex-husband about the situation. Early in the morning of August 13th, Austin knocked on the door of a former classmate who lived a few blocks away. She was quite surprised since they hadn't seen each other in over a year, and he hadn't warned her of his visit. When she asked the reason for his appearance, Austin said he had forgotten what year he was born and urgently needed this information. The puzzled classmate answered that it was in 1996, after which he abruptly turned around and left without a word. Austin's stunt scared and puzzled Bushi, so she immediately called Mrs. Hariff and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using prohibited substances. Only then did she decide to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and share her concerns that something was seriously wrong with their son. The boy's father flew to Florida the next day and, after talking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for an examination, to which he categorically refused. Then he had a heart-to-heart conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send their son for compulsory examination and subsequent treatment in a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they were unable to do so in time. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach. Given the hot and sunny weather, his mother insisted that Haley go along to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing, but dressed unusually warm for the beach, as if he was going to the mountains instead. He wore a thick athletic hoodie with long sleeves, matching pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him dressed like that, they were initially silent, then burst into laughter a few seconds later. They teased Austin, asking why he was dressed that way and if everything was okay with him. Austin became seriously angry, shouting that if they thought he was crazy, then he would act accordingly and end one of their lives. The boys didn't take his words seriously but backed off just to be safe. Haley noticed her brother was on the verge of a breakdown, so she decided to talk to him and calm him down. During their conversation, unheard by the others, Austin told his sister that he wasn't entirely human, but half wild animal, immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. His words frightened her, but she tried to remain calm to avoid provoking aggression from her brother. At the beach, Austin behaved in an entirely normal and natural manner. He joked, laughed, played volleyball with friends, and goofed around. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes, and everyone went their separate ways. Austin and Haley headed towards a small restaurant near the coast, where they planned to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he intended to test his immortality, then proceeded towards a busy highway, planning to cross it in an irresponsible manner, directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she ran after her brother and physically dragged him away, begging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't make anyone wait and silently followed his sister. At dinner, Austin behaved oddly again, silently getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he feared someone, and then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin jumped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, shoved his father hard, and ran out of the restaurant. What unfolded after he left the restaurant could be straight out of a horror movie. He later claimed to have no recollection of the events and found it hard to believe he was capable of such cruelty. Austin walked several miles until he stumbled into an unfamiliar neighborhood. There, the bright light from an open garage caught his attention, and he made his way towards it. In that home lived 59-year-old John Stevens, and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkan Stevens. In the evenings, they enjoyed barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage that was set up like a living room. They had been married for over 25 years, had 3 adult children living independently, and were now enjoying their retirement and each other's company. That evening, John went for a walk with their dog while his wife Michelle prepared everything for their usual movie night. When Michelle saw an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no immediate threat and even asked if he needed assistance. But the situation then took an unexpected turn. Their neighbor, Jeffrey Pfizer, lived across the street and was on friendly terms with the Stevens. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside, and looking into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw a tall, large young man attacking the elderly woman by the open garage. Jeffrey tried to pull the stranger away, but the stranger was overpoweringly strong, knocking Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, the assailant stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens house to draw the attacker's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, he headed to his own home. Only once inside did he realize the assailant had not followed him, but returned to the unfortunate Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife, and that he had been injured along with his elderly neighbor. After speaking with emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening intently. Soon, he was convinced no one was outside his door, and the attacker had stayed at the neighbor's home. Moreover, the assailant was now making strange animal-like sounds, similar to the growling of a wild beast, accompanied by screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive at the scene, but by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that greeted them was horrifying and beyond any logical explanation. 2 officers approached the garage, weapons drawn, only to freeze in disbelief at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of the homeowner, Michelle Mishkan Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground, but it took a moment for the officers to process the scene. One man reached out, pleading for help in a strained voice. Above him was another man, seemingly choking him, gripping his neck with one hand and tilting his head back with the other. The officers demanded the attacker release the victim, threatening with their guns, but he showed no reaction. Firing was too risky due to the chance of hitting both individuals. Instead, one officer pulled out a taser, warned he was about to use it, and moved closer. Only then did he see the assailant was not just attacking, but actually biting victim's face, holding his head and neck firmly. The victim, as you might have guessed, was John Stevens. Beneath him spread a vast pool of blood. His left cheek was missing a chunk of flesh, and his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. The elderly man was immobilized, barely able to move, silently begging for help. The officer shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at the victim's face with his teeth. A kick to the assailant's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens' cheek again. Subsequent kicks did little to deter him. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto the assailant's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented the attacker long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, he claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Mrs. Stevens could not be revived, and her husband succumbed to his injuries on the way to the hospital due to extensive blood loss from stab wounds and the shock of having his flesh consumed. The injured neighbor who reported the incident survived but suffered permanent minor motor skill damage to his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. As for the attacker, He slipped into a coma after ingesting a substance from a bottle in the garage that he mistook for alcohol, which turned out to be a potent substance. The perpetrator suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach, spent several days on the brink of life and death, but was ultimately saved by medical professionals. Austin spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma before he finally regained consciousness and was able to give his account, claiming he remembered nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall the dinner at the restaurant and the argument with his father, after which he walked away. He then described seeing a ghost-like figure that led him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until a light appeared in the distance, which turned out to be a lantern near the Stevens garage, where the homeowner was preparing a barbecue and taking out food. When his presence startled the homeowner, she called for help. Austin admitted to striking her several times and then drawing a knife, declaring he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, attacked him, whom Austin perceived as a demon, and he retaliated with the knife. After Fisher ran to seek help, Austin continued to assault the homeowner until she showed no signs of life. He then noticed a bottle, mistook its contents for alcohol, and drank about half. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. The homeowner had returned, shocked by the scene. Austin claimed no memory of what happened next. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of potent narcotics, which might explain his aggression and insensitivity to pain. However, when he was tested at the hospital, his blood showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol, leading to the conclusion that Austin might have had a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Determining the truth of this claim was left to experienced psychiatrists. Between the courtroom and psychiatric care, the case of Austin Hariff gained widespread media attention due to its unprecedented brutality and ambiguity. The children of the deceased couple, as well as the relatives of the injured neighbor, were convinced that he was feigning insanity and memory lapses in order to be declared incompetent and avoid severe punishment, a sentiment shared by the majority of those following the case. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, noted in his report that Mr. Hariff's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the death of 2 people. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of committing the crime. There were suggestions that his mental health had deteriorated due to his experiments with various narcotics, steroid use, and difficulties in socializing with peers, which he had experienced since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was clean, with no traces of illegal substances or alcohol found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his aggressive behavior lay elsewhere. During one of the court hearings, Austin's father revealed that there was at least one confirmed case of schizophrenia in their family, and he feared that this severe illness had been passed on to his son. It's worth noting that the student was suspected of having a rather rare disorder known as clinical lycanthropy delusion, which could explain why he behaved like a wild beast and was impervious to pain, but none of the psychiatrists examining the defendant confirmed this diagnosis. After treatment, Austin was transferred to jail, but the case remains unresolved to this day. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers insist that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of the victim and the injured man have expressed hope in interviews that Hariff will be found competent and sentenced to death for his heinous acts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Catherine Wells Burr. On the morning of September 12, 2012, a local resident named Orlando was hurrying home after a lengthy night shift at a gas station. He had promised his wife that he would take their young daughter Maria to daycare. Loud music played in the car to keep him awake as the trees along the road swiftly passed by one after another. As he emerged from a sharp turn, he saw black smoke. Orlando slowed down. Smoke was billowing from a nearby parking lot where a car was engulfed in flames. Orlando stopped, ran to take a closer look, but couldn't get close because of the fire. 4 minutes later, when the firefighters arrived at the scene, the car was completely burnt out. The arriving police cordoned off the area with safety tape to keep the gathering onlookers at a distance. The place was quite deserted so early in the morning, and there were no witnesses nearby who could describe the incident's exact moment. Upon examining the scene, a charred body was discovered. The police had to identify the victim and determine the causes of this tragic death. There were no signs of a car accident or skid marks found nearby. Similarly, no tire tread marks from another vehicle were found. The police's initial theory was that the death was caused by a car self-ignition or spontaneous combustion due to malfunctions. A lengthy investigation and multiple expert analyses were ahead. The remains were transported to the forensic laboratory to determine the identity and cause of death of the deceased. Fragments of the burned vehicle were also delivered to the forensic laboratory to identify any malfunctions and establish the cause of the fire. The police began their investigation by checking the missing persons database and recent reports of disappearances. Forensic experts quickly identified the deceased. She was a 23-year-old local resident, Catherine Wells Burr. On the same day, a report of a missing person was filed by Rafal Novak concerning the disappearance of her. According to Rafal Novak's report, he left for work at 5:30 a.m., while his girlfriend Catherine was still sleeping soundly at home. Although they worked for the same company, his shift started 2 hours earlier. When Catherine did not show up for work after this time and Rafal could not find her at any of places, he contacted the police. The investigation began. The police interviewed the victim's parents and sister, as well as Rafal Novak, who reported her missing, and all her colleagues and friends. Gradually, by piecing together information about the last days and subsequently the years of the young woman's life, they managed to reconstruct a sequence of events that led to her tragic demise. Catherine Wells Burr was born in 1989. Her father and mom, Phil and Jane Wells Burr, in the United Kingdom. She was the second child in her family, with an older sister named Lynn. During the summer of 2010, while on a university break, Catherine met one of the employees, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, on a new vacuum cleaner production line. The tall, ruggedly handsome blonde quickly caught Catherine's eye. He was an immigrant from Poland with a former wife and son back home. About 4 years prior, he had moved to England in search of a better life. Catherine and Rafal soon started dating. Initially, they met for lunch at the cafe on the production site, but these lunches quickly turned into romantic dinners. Rafal courted Catherine beautifully, gifting her lovely bouquets, taking her to movies, and going for walks. Rafal opened up to Catherine, sharing his past life and reasons for moving to the UK. Catherine's trusting heart let the blonde man in completely. Their relationship progressed so swiftly that within a few months, Catherine introduced Rafal to her parents. They joyfully welcomed their daughter's choice into the family, hopeful for the couple's future happiness. Soon, the lovers were planning their wedding. In 2011, Catherine graduated with honors from Bath Spa University and landed a promising job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the company that manufactures Henry vacuum cleaners. She quickly advanced in her career, providing good job opportunities for her parents and sister. Catherine was intelligent and well-educated. She always knew how to approach people, was concerned with her colleagues' problems, and was very attentive to those around her. Her kind gaze and radiant smile endeared her to people who held the young leader in high regard. Catherine Wells Burr's career was on a fast track to success. Her substantial earnings, combined with those of her partner Rafal Novak, allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace in Willow Way. Despite their financial well-being, the house was bought on a mortgage, for which the young couple secured insurance coverage as per their agreement with the bank. Youth, successful careers, and love. It seemed they had everything needed for happiness. Yet, the fateful day of September 12, 2012, marked a dividing line in their lives, changing everything from before to after. The investigation pressed on, uncovering new and unfamiliar facts about the lives of Catherine and Rafal. Over time, the veil of deceit that had enveloped their relationship from the start began to lift. 29-year-old Rafał Nowak left behind a wife and child in Poland, fleeing to escape significant debts. He relocated to the UK, where he met Anna Lagwinowicz. Since 2008, they maintained a close relationship, then Catherine came into the picture for a while. Rafał saw both women, but ultimately he chose Catherine Wells Burr, seeing her as a more viable option for a family and financial stability. While Catherine genuinely dreamed of a happy marriage with the man she loved and starting a family, Nowak was plotting a scheme to end her life, intending to leave himself and his mistress, Anna Lagwinowicz, with the life insurance payout and the large house, a significant portion of the funds for which had been contributed by Catherine. The plot of this crime was meticulously planned and executed with even greater cruelty and cold-bloodedness. On the day of her disappearance, after waiting a few hours, Rafał approached Catherine's boss to inquire about her whereabouts, feigning sincere panic and despair in front of Catherine's colleagues and relatives. Catherine was not found at her parents' home, nor at her own, and her car was missing as well. Rafał recalled that she had been receiving threatening letters from a certain mentally unstable admirer for some time. Following this, her family contacted the police. The family was in the living room of the young couple's house, awaiting her return, when they were informed that a burning car with a body inside had been found. Rafał mentioned that the evening before her disappearance was entirely normal. The couple had gone for a walk after work, stopped by a store for groceries, had dinner, and then went to bed together after watching some television. Catherine did not appear scared or disturbed. However, a more detailed investigation proved that her death occurred earlier. Catherine was strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her own bed while she was sleeping. Her lifeless body was then placed in the car, taken a short distance from the house, and callously set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Yet Rafał Nowak had a solid alibi. He was at work from 5:30 a.m., and according to him, Catherine was asleep in bed when he left. The burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. However, Rafał was still at home at 1:30 a.m., significantly altering the case's direction. Thus, Rafał Nowak became the prime suspect in the murder of Catherine Wells Burr. Evidence allowed for Nowak to be detained pending further investigation. Rafał claimed that Catherine was being pursued by a stalker who had repeatedly written to her and driven her to hysteria. During the investigation, it was revealed that Catherine indeed had accounts on several adult websites, indicating a hidden side of her life unknown to her close ones. Intimate photos and flirtatious exchanges with men were found, along with a letter from a secret admirer. However, no matter how long you try to twist the truth, it always comes to light. In an attempt to mislead the investigation and direct it towards a false trail, Rafał forgot to destroy the evidence proving his direct involvement in Catherine's demise. Importantly, this provided the prosecution with a motive. Upon examining Nowak's phone, investigators discovered that he never ceased communication and meetings with Anna Lagwinowicz. They actively met over the last few months, and it was also found that the man had a financial interest. Shortly before Catherine's demise, they both insured their lives for a sum of £123,000, with Catherine and Rafał being the sole beneficiaries of the insurance contracts and recipients of the payouts. The receipt of a substantial life insurance sum emerged as the primary motive in the case regarding Catherine's demise and the arson of her car to confuse the investigation. Police discovered that on the day of Catherine's disappearance, she sent a message to Anna Lagwinowicz's phone. Surveillance cameras also revealed that a few days before the crime, Anna and her uncle filled a full canister of gasoline at a gas station, suggesting their potential involvement in the case. 32-year-old Anna Lagwinowicz and her 38-year-old uncle, Tadeusz Dmytryshin, became suspects in the complicity of intentional crime and arson to conceal evidence. The crime was meticulously planned over several months by the trio. They prepared thoroughly for the act, creating accounts on pornographic websites, uploading photoshopped images of Catherine, and fabricating and saving exchanges with various men to lead the investigation astray with a false trail. When Rafal and Anna realized it was futile to deny the irrefutable evidence, they started blaming each other. The conspirators wove a web of deceitful lies around an honest and cheerful young woman. They created fake online profiles for her on websites used by people seeking casual sexual encounters, and went to great lengths to conceal their crime, not only setting her body on fire, but also fabricating a completely fictitious backstory for her. They intended to depict Catherine as a promiscuous woman with many secrets and desires. One of the conspirators sent a text message from Catherine's phone at 5:17 a.m. on the day of her death to a fictional person, suggesting she was headed to meet him. However, forensic experts determined that when the fire started in the car, Catherine was wearing only her favorite nightgown, not the outfit she would have chosen for a meeting with a man. The police also discovered that a pillow was missing from her bed, and the only pillowcase had been washed and was hanging on a clothesline, leading them to believe she was suffocated in Anna Lagwinowicz's car. Detectives found a SIM card linked to the number Catherine was supposed to have texted that morning in Anna's apartment trash bin, and they also found notes she had written seeking inspiration for messages supposedly sent by the mysterious person. As soon as Novak and Lainovich realized the game was up, they both claimed that Catherine's demise was the act of a hired criminal. A week before the trial began, Anna asked a fellow inmate to secretly pass on a fake confession from an imaginary hitman who claimed Novak paid him £20,000 to end Catherine's life. The story penned by Lainovich might have offered a chilling insight into what happened to their victim, according to this fictional hitman. Rafal Novak played the role of a loving boyfriend perfectly in the days leading up to Catherine's demise, holding hands and kissing her in front of family members. He even told her mother, Jane, that he had lost his world and his future. Rafal Novak refused to acknowledge his involvement in the young woman's death and went further, telling her mother, Jane Wells Burr, that her daughter was receiving emails and text messages from an ex-boyfriend who said if he couldn't have her, no one could, to complete the narrative. He even claimed she spoke of taking her own life. Worse still, Novak let the distraught Wells family parents comfort him, who believed he was also mourning the young woman he loved. Rafal's acting was so convincing that Catherine's mother, Jane, hugged him after her death and allowed him to call her Mom. She said that after the police told her in the early days of the investigation that he was seen more as a witness than a suspect, she decided to offer him all the support possible. I thought if Catherine loved him that much and he was part of our family, then he deserved to come back. The lengthy trial commenced under the chairmanship of Justice Sharp. The jury heard during the trial that the three defendants hoped to receive a life insurance payout of £123,000 and half ownership of a two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000 following Catherine Wells Burr's death. The court was told that Rafal Novak showed no emotion when police discovered the woman's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12th. Anna Lagwinowicz, who often shook her head and laughed on the defendant's bench when Novak suggested she was responsible for the crime, refused to take the witness stand. Dmitry Sheen also did not testify in his defense during the trial. Judge told the defendants that the murder was a terrible, merciless crime, cold-bloodedly committed with a gross breach of trust. None of the three showed any emotion during the sentencing. Judge Justice Sharp sentenced the three Polish nationals to mandatory life sentences with a minimum of 32 years in prison without the possibility of early release. The judge expressed heartfelt sympathy for Catherine's parents. They could never have known that behind the facade presented to them by Rafal Novak was a person devoid of remorse and decency. It was all about the money. Novak and Catherine had no ties binding them. They were not married, nor did they have children. The crime against Catherine was motivated by money, selfishness, and greed. While in the case of Anna Lagwinowicz, it stemmed from jealousy and a desire for revenge. At the request of the parents, Judge Justice Sharp read statements from Catherine's mother and sister. Her mother wept in the courtroom as her statement was read, which said Catherine was a caring, loving, sincere, generous, loyal, thoughtful, exceptional, and amazing. She had a bright and promising future with so much potential. Her parents, Phil and I, were immensely proud of the young woman she had become. The manner of Catherine's passing, a cruel and calculated act of villainy, and the hatred shown to her, will haunt us for the rest of our lives. Now, she considers Rafal Novak an evil person who should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Catherine's father, Philip, added that they took him into their home, and he became like a son, but he betrayed them all during the trial. Rafal Novak, covered in tattoos, wept in the witness box, insisting he had no part in the demise of his true love. A father of one, who has a wife and a teenage son back in Poland, told the jurors that everyone is blaming him for something he never did. The court heard that Novak showed no emotion when the police discovered Catherine Wells Burr's body in her burned car. Her mother, Jane Wells Burr, told the jurors that he didn't even mention Catherine, instead asking for a steak dinner after his initial release from police custody. Mrs. Wells Burr said that as soon as they bought a house together and took out a life insurance policy, her daughter's fate was sealed. She told the police that her life had a bounty on it, and indeed, she had signed her own death warrant the moment she signed the mortgage. Thus, 31-year-old Rafal Novak, a factory worker, was found guilty of the crime against his girlfriend, having suffocated her with a pillow while she slept. Afterward, he orchestrated a conspiracy with his secret lover, 32-year-old Anna Lagwinowicz, and her uncle, 38-year-old Tadeusz Dimitryshin, to claim a life insurance payout of £123,000 and a share in the house. It is believed that they also lived in Taunton, took Wellsbur's body in her Ford Focus to a remote location 7 miles from the city, and set the car on fire at 6 a.m., by which time Novak was already at work, providing him with a solid alibi. The jurors of the Royal Court of Bristol found Rafal Novak, Anna Lagwinowicz, and Tadeusz Dimitryshin Shine, all originally from Poland, guilty of the crime. The crime was the culmination of months of secret meetings and phone calls between Rafal Novak and his Polish lover, Anna Lagwinowicz, with Catherine completely unaware of her role in what turned out to be a love triangle. The accused spent months leading detectives on a false trail, creating fake profiles for the girl on adult websites, and sending her messages from a supposed mysterious lover. Following the verdict, the parents of the young woman who lost her life, Catherine Wells Burr, called for stricter immigration controls. Philip and Jane Wells Burr, who have separated after the tragic loss of their daughter, stated that Rafal Novak, convicted of assaulting his wife in Poland, would not have been allowed entry into the UK if the immigration rules were as stringent as those in the United States of America. They blamed the European Union and stated that the UK needs to tighten its entry measures for foreign nationals. Family members of Catherine Wells Burr wept in court as the sentence was announced. The 3 perpetrators showed no emotion. The criminal trio received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now, they have their whole lives ahead to ponder over criminal schemes, but without any chance to put them into practice. Thus, through their own efforts, the Polish immigrants traded their dreams of a successful and wealthy life for free prison cells. After the verdict was announced, the victim's mother spoke her final words, describing her daughter as a beautiful young woman. She expressed pride in her daughter's academic accomplishments, having earned a first-class degree from the University of Bath Spa. The mother described her daughter as determined, hardworking, and beautiful, and expressed the difficulty of continuing on without her. She lamented the loss of her daughter's great potential and the happiness she could have experienced, stating that her life was taken away and the family was robbed of her presence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Phelps. In a quiet suburban neighborhood in North Carolina, a young woman named Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps was found brutally murdered in her home. She was a loving wife, a dedicated mother, and a cherished member of her community. The shocking discovery of Lauren's lifeless body sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community, leaving family, friends, and neighbors in disbelief and mourning. Lauren was described as a compassionate and vibrant woman who had a passion for helping others. As the investigation unfolded, the disturbing events leading up to her tragic death were revealed, uncovering a dark and unexpected truth. The investigation into Lauren's murder was complex, as law enforcement meticulously pieced together the events of that fateful night. Their dedication and commitment to justice became unwavering in the pursuit of truth. This is the story of Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps, a life taken far too soon, leaving a community grappling with grief and seeking answers. Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County, California, United States, and raised in Kentucky by her parents Lori and Dale Hugelmeyer. She had a very close, supportive, and loving family with 2 sisters. Lauren was especially close with her father and one of her sisters, Beth Agner. She was known to be a friendly, caring, kind, and smart girl. Her family practiced Christianity and were very religious, eventually moving to North Carolina before she graduated. Lauren first met Matthew in school while they were teenagers. However, they weren't particularly close at the time. Matthew, on the other hand, didn't have the same kind of family that Lauren had. He had a very rough upbringing and barely had a family at all. His father wasn't in his life, and his mother was only around half the time. His mother remarried several times, and Matthew was never able to form a bond with any of his stepfathers. Due to his dysfunctional home life, he began acting out and eventually lived with his grandparents full-time. After joining high school, Matthew ended up making friends with the wrong crowd. He and his friends were using drugs and alcohol, specifically quercetin cough and cold medicine. As is known, most cough medicines can give someone a high feeling when taken in large doses, and can even be addictive when abused for long-term use. Matthew's grandparents decided to take him out of public school and enrolled him in a private Christian academy in hopes of changing his behavior and getting him back on track to live a decent life. Luckily, it worked for the most part. He stopped abusing drugs and alcohol, got his grades up, and did very well in school. However, he continued to abuse cough syrup for the rest of his life. Lauren and Matthew reconnected on social media. It started with DMs on Instagram, then texting, talking on the phone, and video chats. They continued this for a while until one day Matthew decided to move to North Carolina to end their long-distance relationship. Matthew was then acquainted with Lauren's family and spent a lot of time with them. Her family loved him and thought he was amazing for the most part. Lauren's mother adored Matthew and treated him like her own son, but Lauren's father had his suspicions about him. He thought there was something off about Matthew and felt their relationship was moving too fast, since Matthew had just moved to North Carolina after only a few months of online communication. Lauren's father's suspicions were proven when they invited Matthew over for family game night. They were playing 20 questions, and it eventually came out that he was married once before. Everyone thought it was strange that he hadn't mentioned this before and wasn't talking much about it. They asked him questions, but he chose to dodge and not answer most of them. Lauren got over it and put it behind her, but the rest of her family remained cautious about him. Lauren and Matthew continued spending time together, and the more time they spent together, the more they fell for each other. Matthew seemed like the perfect man for her. They had a great connection and similar hobbies. He got along with her family, her friends liked him, and they did many things together, including taking trips and vacations. Matthew then disclosed to Lauren that he wanted to become a pastor, and she loved this news. It kind of sealed the deal for them, and she knew he was the man she wanted to spend her life with. They even became engaged later in 2015. The newly engaged couple had an engagement party, but it was mostly Lauren's family and friends who attended. Matthew's mother showed up, but she did something that annoyed Lauren and put a sour taste in her family's mouth. Matthew's mother showed up wearing a white dress, which looked like it was intentional. As everyone automatically knows, you never show up to someone's engagement party or their wedding wearing white. Throughout their engagement, there was a lot of conflict between Lauren and Matthew's mother. Matthew's mother just didn't simply tolerate Lauren for some reason and didn't think she was good enough for her son. Lauren eventually was able to put their issues behind her and continued with the wedding plan. The two became married the following year in November 2016. Lauren and Matthew both loved Harry Potter and Star Wars and decided to have a Star Wars-themed wedding, having the best men hold lightsabers. Despite all that, their marriage began to tumble down as soon as the wedding was over, when they began having many fights, and there was so much stress between the two of them. One of the stresses in their marriage was contributed by Matthew's mother. On one occasion, 6 months after Lauren and Matthew got married, they went to Kentucky to visit his family. Matthew's mother called Lauren and told them they were going to be doing a family photo shoot and everyone needed to wear blue. Lauren was excited and picked out a few nice outfits to bring with her. But when they arrived, she couldn't even participate in the photo shoot at all. As it turns out, the men were wearing blue and the women were wearing white. Lauren was disappointed with that, and even though Matthew mentioned that his mom just might have accidentally misinformed her, Lauren and her family knew that she did it on purpose. Nonetheless, that wasn't nearly the biggest issue they had in their marriage. At the age of 29, Lauren was a highly independent and hardworking woman, while her husband Matthew, 30, studied to become a pastor for their local church. Lauren took up jobs as an auditor, a daycare worker, sold scented candles, and even participated in an MLM company to keep them financially afloat. Having been married for less than a year, the pair looked like a picture-perfect couple through the lens of social media. But the reality of their relationship was much different, which only came to light after the fall of 2017. On September 1st, 2017, Matthew made a frantic 911 call. He told the dispatcher that he had taken Coricidin cough and cold before going to sleep, and when he awoke, he was covered in blood. There was a knife on the bed, and his wife was on the floor with multiple stab wounds. Matthew admitted that he had no recollection of what had transpired, but he admitted to his suspicions of being his wife's attacker. Shortly after the 911 call was made, police arrived at the scene and found Lauren covered in blood, lying in a fetal position on the floor of their bedroom, holding clumps of her hair in both of her hands. As Matthew had described, a knife was found perfectly placed on the bed, and the cold medicine was on the bathroom counter. However, an autopsy later revealed that Lauren was stabbed 123 times in her head, neck, and arms. Some wounds were 4 inches deep, turning Matthew's claims of what had befallen questionable at best. The detectives took him into custody, but when he refused to change his narrative and admit to the truth, they began looking deeper into his life and relationship with Lauren, uncovering a myriad of incriminating evidence against him. During the investigation back at the crime scene, investigators believed that the crime scene didn't seem authentic. They claimed that the cold medicine looked like it was purposely placed there to make it seem like he took it. The knife was set on the bed exactly like he claimed it to be, and everything at the scene just looked staged. It doesn't help that there was little to no blood on Matthew at all, besides a few drops on his feet and his shoes. Investigators said that there was no way he couldn't have any blood on him after a brutal murder like that. Lastly, his entire demeanor at the crime scene was strange. On the phone, he was frantic and crying, but when the police were questioning him in person, he was calm and collected. He seemed quite calm and put together. He seemed almost emotionless. As the investigators delved into his past, they found out that not only did Matthew have a record of abusing medicine in the past and using it to excuse his actions, but he also had a secret Instagram profile called Martycore Radical for his obsession with American Psycho, the 2000 film about a violent and twisted serial killer. In Matthew's Instagram, there were also a lot of disturbing pictures, including Matthew dressing up as a character from American Psycho. He would also heavily talk about Satan, demons, devil worship, and death in general. In the last photo he posted to his account on the night before the murder, he wrote, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer. Found an angel to kill." The police also found a journal that Matthew had, which talks a lot about his insecurities with his marriage, thinking he's not good enough for Lauren, how he doesn't feel good enough for her family, and talks about the jealousy he has about the kind of family she had. He also talked a lot about his depression. In an interview with Matthew's friend, he claimed that Matthew told him that he wanted to know how it felt to kill someone, but he thought Matthew wasn't serious at the time. It became quite a shock to Lauren's family when they found out about what he was interested in, and her parents became very concerned because one of the reasons Lauren fell for Matthew was due to how devoted he was to Christianity, but instead he had other dark secret fantasies and likings. Lauren's friends who were interviewed mentioned that they were having major financial troubles. Lauren was very hardworking her entire life and worked 2 jobs while married to Matthew. The first one being an auditor for a Fortune 500 company, and the second being a babysitter working in a church daycare. She also had her own little side business where she would make candles and sell them on MLM. She even had a YouTube channel where she'd advertise these candles. They also mentioned that Matthew was always between jobs and never seemed to hold one down for more than a few months. The couple had a lot of debt, but Matthew was the one who was causing them to drown in bills. He spent tons of money, especially at Best Buy, where he spent thousands of dollars. He would even steal money right out of Lauren's purse and would take money out of their savings account that was used for vacations. Before she married Matthew, Lauren had around $10,000 saved in her account. At the time of her death, she had a little less than $1,000. Along with the financial issues, they even started doubting each other when it came to being faithful. Matthew was cheating on Lauren, and she had a valid reason for being jealous. Matthew, however, had no real reason to accuse Lauren of being unfaithful. The only reason he had stemmed from jealousy was when he thought a mutual friend at their church had feelings for her, and vice versa, and she didn't. Lauren's friends, including her sister Beth, all mentioned that she would text them all the time about her stress, and told them she was really considering leaving Matthew and that she wasn't happy anymore, and he turned into a whole different person. She just wanted to keep trying at first, because she's religious and didn't want a divorce. All of that changed one night when she was cooking dinner for Matthew while being on the phone with her sister. There was a knock on the door. Matthew answered it and looked back at Lauren and said he was leaving to go hang out with a friend named Valerie. Lauren was upset and mentioned that she was cooking dinner, and he said he would be back soon, and he left. She waited around for him to come back until she received a text from him. "Just eat dinner without me. I'm having way too much fun with Valerie." This was now Lauren's breaking point. She texted her sister and mentioned that she was finally done with him for good. Because of their financial issues, she not only had to put restrictions on her husband's expenses, but she also threatened to walk away from him if he didn't change on one occasion. Thus, the authorities determined that Matthew knew precisely what he was doing when he stabbed his wife to death on that fateful day. Investigators also interviewed their neighbor, who admitted that she and Matthew had a bond at one point. They would often chat and flirt with each other, and they bonded over their similar problems with depression and anxiety. However, she began to distance herself when he started talking to her about disturbing things such as death and suicide. She also had a gun and exposed Carrie's license to him on one occasion. But Matthew walked up to her one night and said, "You know, I can take that gun from you and kill somebody with it." During his trial, the defense didn't have a leg to stand on and had an overwhelming amount of evidence against them. It didn't help that Matthew was stated to be completely aware of what he was doing, and there wasn't nearly enough cold medicine in his system to cause any kind of crime, let alone committing a brutal murder. The creators of the cold medicine he was taking even made a statement that there have been a lot of studies on their product, and no one has ever done anything like this before. Lauren's parents also made statements on her behalf, and investigators mentioned that they found questions in his internet searches asking, "How loopy does quercetin make you? And has anyone ever been high from quercetin?" In October of 2018, to escape the death penalty, he admitted that the alibi of the cough and cold medicine was a lie, and that he had pretended to be delirious during the 911 call to get away with his actions. Matthew was charged with premeditated first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Matthew even stood up to give Lauren's family an apology for what he did to her and what he did to them. But her parents said his apology means nothing, and they will never forgive him for taking their daughter away. Lauren's story has ignited a collective effort to support victims of domestic violence and raise awareness about the resources available to those in need. Community initiatives have sprung up, providing support and a haven for those seeking refuge. The pursuit of justice for Lauren led to the conviction of the individual responsible for her murder. The intervention and support for victims. As we remember Lauren, we honor her memory by continuing to stand against domestic violence and supporting those affected by it. Her legacy serves as a reminder of the urgent need for education, awareness, and compassion within our communities. In the end, Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps' legacy will be one of resilience and hope. May her memory inspire us to create a world where love, empathy, and support prevail, ensuring that no one should live in fear within their own homes. The sudden disappearance of 27-year-old Kelly sent shockwaves through her loved ones when she failed to show up for work on October 12, 2013. Her colleagues tried to reach her, but her phone was silent. Normally, Kelly was very active on social media, so this was alarming. She never let her phone out of her sight before. Concerned, her loved ones contacted the police and filed a missing persons report. Detect launched an investigation that uncovered several intriguing details, and the story grew more complicated with each discovery. Kelly DWI was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago, into a loving family. In 2002, when Kelly was 16 years old, her parents decided to divorce but maintained a friendly relationship for her benefit. The divorce was a traumatic event that significantly impacted Kelly's life. A year later, she graduated from high school without a clear direction for her future. Opting to take a break before heading to college, she worked part-time at a restaurant. By 2008, at the age of 22, Kelly decided to make a bold move and relocated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city about an hour away from Chicago that reminded her of home. Milwaukee is the largest city in Wisconsin by population and offered great opportunities. Kelly quickly adapted. She made new friends, attended college, and took a job as a yoga coach to cover tuition and housing expenses. She also worked occasionally as a nanny to manage financial challenges. Kelly enjoyed exploring all the trendy and interesting places in the city. She relished life and harbored big aspirations for the future. The last time she saw her father was about a month before she vanished. He visited Milwaukee to see his daughter. At that time, Kelly had already graduated and was working as both a yoga trainer and a sales clerk at a sports store. Her co-workers held her in high regard for her fun-loving and upbeat personality. They genuinely liked her. By all appearances, Kelly seemed happy and content with her life right up until her sudden disappearance. Kelly loved her job and had been in relationship with Chris Zach for a year. Chris Zach, a 38-year-old, was a successful IT at a trucking company. He had graduated from Boston University with a degree in international back in 2009. For his career, he relocated from New York City to Milwaukee. Chris was known as a hard-working and decent individual with a good family. Just like Kelly, he enjoyed sports and entertainment. Together, they seemed to make an excellent pair. By that time, Chris had already established a successful career, owned a luxurious apartment, drove an expensive car, and accumulated significant wealth on his own. Kelly's father liked Chris and believed he was well suited for her. During the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals wishing her harm. All her personal belongings were left at home, which ruled out the possibility of her running away voluntarily. What alarmed the authorities was the absence of any activity on her bank accounts and phone, leading officers to believe she might be in trouble. The last person to see Kelly on October 10, 2013, was her boyfriend, Chris. Investigators invited him to the station for questioning. Chris stated that they met at his luxury apartment in Lafayette Towers and spent some time there before heading to a small bar across the street around 8 p.m. There, they socialized with others and had drinks. Cheerfully, they returned to his apartment by about 2:30 a.m., went to bed soon after. By 9 a.m., Kelly left the apartment and they never saw each other again. Chris stressed that he did not consider Kelly as his girlfriend. As per him, they had an open relationship and he was genuinely in love with another woman with whom he envisioned his future. This revelation made investigators suspicious, despite Chris's story appearing plausible on the surface. Detectives decided to scrutinize him further. They interviewed friends who were with the couple that night to gather more insights. They confirmed they had an enjoyable time together, starting at the bar, then moving outdoors. Hungry, they ordered a pizza and ate it right on a bench. Kelly was in good spirits and shared her for the next day, which happened to be her day off. She intended to catch up on sleep, practice yoga, do laundry, and rest. Chris and Kelly later headed home. Shortly after, a friend came over for another drink upon their invitation. This friend felt uncomfortable being in Chris's apartment. After having a few drinks, she sensed tension within the couple and decided to leave. She mentioned that Chris was smoking and chatting with her that night, while Kelly seemed rather sad. The girl assumed Kelly was just tired and chose not to bother them further, excusing herself from the apartment. Upon conversing candidly with Kelly's other girlfriends, the investigator discovered that things were not as smooth as they appeared between Chris and Kelly. While Kelly was genuinely in love with him, Chris didn't seem equally invested in the relationship. He wasn't making any joint plans with her for their future, which distressed Kelly. Kelly suspected that Chris was involved in an affair and foresaw an impending breakup. Consequently, she began exploring other options by registering on a dating site and corresponding with different men online without meeting them in person, hoping to normalize relations with Chris. Her friends disclosed that they noticed bruises on Kelly's arms and neck, but whenever they questioned her about it, Kelly deflected by joking about having had a crazy night and changed the subject immediately. They harbored suspicions of possible violence, but Kelly never confirmed these suspicions. By then, the CCTV footage from Chris's house had been analyzed. It showed the couple returning drunk to the apartment at night. However, there was no evidence of Kelly leaving afterward. This contradicted Chris's claim that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It turned out another friend of Chris's had been at the apartment that evening. This friend reported using illegal substances with Chris. Based on this information, detectives obtained a search warrant for the apartment and went to Chris's residence. Inside, they discovered various substances, pills, pipes, and other items, and arrested Chris for possession. The detectives also noted an unusual detail: a torn curtain in the bathroom. The hooks that held it were damaged, as if the curtain had been ripped off by force. During interrogation, Chris remained calm and confirmed he had taken substances, but denied distributing them. The police accessed Chris's cell phone and found alarming materials. There were photos of a girl, naked and unconscious on his bed, as well as a video showing him raping the unconscious girl and seemingly strangling her. Suspicions arose that Chris was drugging the girl to become intimate with her. These materials were entered into evidence concerning Kelly's disappearance. Subsequently, the police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog trained to detect dead bodies. The dog responded to both the bed and bathroom in Chris's apartment, then indicated interest at the front door. The dog later led law enforcement officers to Chris's car in the parking lot and pointed towards garbage cans. By this point, investigators were certain the missing person was deceased, making Chris the prime suspect in Kelly's case. Evidence suggested Kelly spent her last moments in his apartment before he transported her body elsewhere by car. However, it remained unclear how he managed to move her body undetected by any of the 28 CCTV cameras present. While continuing their investigation, police examined Chris's computer and found explicit images involving minors. Consequently, he faced charges for possession of these materials. At that point, Chris was out on bail pending trial as investigators continued seeking evidence and Kelly's body to file charges against him effectively. After recalling what Chris had mentioned about another girl he was dating secretly, detectives began investigating the suspect's double life. It turned out that this girl's name was Megan, and they had been seeing each other for approximately 3 years. However, Megan was unaware of Kelly's presence in Chris's life. The detectives approached Megan and showed her photographs of Chris's apartment. As she examined the images, Megan noticed that several items were missing. They lacked a shower curtain, a rug, and several towels. The bedroom was missing a large golf bag that was always kept there. Based on the description, detectives hypothesized that Kelly's body could have fit inside such a bag. After scrutinizing all entrances and exits within the building, the police deduced that Chris had one alternate route to reach his car without being seen. It appeared he had premeditated this route, studying the house well in advance. Parking lot camera footage revealed Chris arriving with a large bag that he stored in the trunk of his car. Chris departed from his residence at 10:06 a.m. on October 11th. At exactly 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone was permanently disconnected at the same location. Over the succeeding 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips to and from the house while loading items into his car. He finally left for good at 6:16 p.m., not returning until the next day. When interrogated by investigators concerning his activities, Chris claimed he was transferring his summer sports equipment to his mother's house. However, no one found this statement credible around 7:30 p.m. on that same day. Chris had planned to meet Megan, but arrived over an hour late. Detectives speculated that during this time, he was likely searching for an appropriate location to dispose of Kelly's body, thus causing his delay. Unfortunately, tracking his movements throughout the day posed difficulties since he had turned off his phone earlier that morning. Being an experienced IT professional, Chris likely understood that keeping his phone active would facilitate easy tracking through phone billing information. According to Megan's testimony, Chris was not himself that night. He seemed agitated and nervous. He started fiddling with his phone, claiming it wasn't working, which he said was the reason for his lateness. After the date, they headed to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. Throughout ordeal, Chris appeared so stressed out that he didn't sleep a wink and sweated profusely to the point where she even had to change the sheets the morning. Investigators speculated that his anxiety was due to not yet having disposed of Kelly's body, which was in his trunk. Fear of exposure loomed large. Chris was evidently trying to figure out where he could hide the remains. On the morning of October 12th, he said goodbye to Megan and left. But before leaving, he tried to convince her to move with him urgently to another city, Denver, but she refused. Police officers were able to track where Chris went using his car's GPS. It led them to a place called Cheese House, a cheese store located 130 kilometers from Milwaukee. But why would Chris need to drive that far early in the morning for cheese? Obviously, that's not why he headed there. However, Chris claimed he bought a piece of cheese there for his parents and even had a receipt for the 9:55 a.m. purchase on October 12th. His parents confirmed that he brought them cheese. Yet it was hard for investigators to believe this, because similar cheese could easily be bought at a regular supermarket near his house. The police suspected this area might be where he disposed of Kelly's body. Further inquiries revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers a little past noon, a detail that raised eyebrows. Detectives believed this stop wasn't accidental. They theorized that Chris decided to discard an old pair of shoes, which might have had drops of blood, or leave footprints at the site where Kelly's remains could be found, thus leading investigators back to him. It appeared meticulously planned, as he methodically got rid of all evidence while creating an alibi for himself. The suspect had a sharp mind and aimed to execute the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to convict him of falsehoods. The distance between the cheese store and the sports store was approximately 80 kilometers, a trip he would typically complete in about an hour. Yet, he appeared at the store more than 2 hours later. Delay suggested that for another hour, he was engaged in something else, likely hiding the body. The theory was that he had found a place along the way to dispose of the bag. Police were on the hunt for the body, but lacked a specific location, making their search challenging and inconclusive. The possible search area covered the entire 80 kilometers route, a scenario akin to looking for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, in November 2014, Chris Zoka faced trial for possession of illegal substances and explicit child photos. He pleaded guilty and received a sentence of 19 years in prison. This was already significant for Milwaukee police, as they managed to imprison such a dangerous individual. Concurrently, the roadside search persisted. At one point, success came when human remains were discovered by a local resident taking a walk in a wooded area about 60 kilometers from the city. Dental records later identified these remains as Kelly DWIs. The local resident immediately reported this grim discovery to the sheriff's office. The authorities quickly presumed these were Kelly's remains, whose whereabouts they had sought for so long. This find finally concluded the search for their daughter for Kelly's parents, who had known no peace for over a year and a half. Now it was imperative to seek justice for her by establishing the precise cause of death. From the skeleton alone, determining this cause was impossible. The medical examiner suggested that Kelly might have been strangled. However, since there was no significant pressure applied, her hyoid bone remained unbroken. There wasn't any evidence at the site where her body was found, not even remnants like torn curtains or towels or any bags, leaving many questions unanswered. The position of the body was highly unusual. The skeleton was discovered face down, with one arm positioned beneath the torso, and the legs bent as if confined for a prolonged period post-mortem. This suggested Kelly had indeed been hidden in that golf bag. Chris was captured on his house cameras with that same bag, driving down the road and seemingly disposing of the body. However, all evidence was circumstantial. No direct proof implicated Chris. The detectives continued their investigation methodically, as their suspect was already in jail. Ultimately, Chris wasn't charged until 5 years after Kelly's disappearance. The charges were negligent homicide and hiding the body. The police couldn't prove premeditation. They surmised that on that night, events unfolded similarly to what investigators observed in the video. Chris got intimate with Kelly, lost control during strangulation, and killed her. Following this unintended act, he removed the bathroom curtain, rug and towels to wrap her body carefully before cleaning the house thoroughly and concealing the body in a bag. Chris maintained his innocence throughout the trial. The prosecution presented CCTV footage and cell phone recordings depicting the strangulation. Additionally, a canine inspection of his apartment corroborated incriminating findings. Megan testified against him, noting his unusual nervousness on that day and tardiness for a meeting. Chris's ex-girlfriends also testified at the trial, describing his troubling interest in choking and rough sex which frightened them. Meanwhile, the defense argued that there was no direct evidence linking him to Kelly's murder. The whole case leaned heavily on guesswork and speculation. Despite these allegations, Chris had no prior arrests or convictions other than a substance possession story. He was an accomplished IT professional with a reputable career and family life, appearing incapable of such an act. Additionally, it emerged during trial not all CCTV footage had been preserved fully beforehand. This lack of comprehensive evidence added further complications to establishing a clear narrative around what precisely transpired. The prosecution couldn't definitively prove that the deceased hadn't exited the house. The defense even brought a witness to trial who claimed he saw a girl resembling Kelly the weekend after she vanished. This witness had seen her on TV as a missing person, but wasn't absolutely certain it was Kelly. This gave the defense an opening to propose that Kelly had indeed left Chris's apartment and subsequently encountered one of her new online dates. Regarding the dog search, the defense argued there's no way to confirm what exactly alerted the dog, as there was no videotape. Hence, it relies solely on the police officer's interpretation, which could be subjective. However, the prosecution countered by stating that the dog experiment was carried out as objectively as possible in front of numerous police officers who all concurred with its results. Moreover, they suggested the witness likely saw another girl in that car because by then Kelly had ceased all communication, no answers to calls or messages, and inactive social media, which was uncharacteristic of her. Thus, they asserted Kelly must have been dead by that time. The prosecutor convinced the jury that Chris orchestrated her murder meticulously and eliminated evidence so thoroughly they couldn't directly link him to it. Despite this, after lengthy deliberation, the jury found him guilty of first-degree negligent homicide and concealing a body. The victim's family and prosecution pushed for the harshest sentence of 48 years imprisonment. The defense sought a reduced sentence of 22 years. Ultimately, in December 2018, 43-year-old Chris Zaka received a 31-year prison sentence, 26 years for manslaughter and 5 for hiding the body. Currently housed at Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin, Chris Zaka will be eligible for parole in 2065 when he turns 90 years old. He expressed dissatisfaction with his sentence and attempted an appeal which was denied. The deceased's family is satisfied with what amounts to a life sentence for him. 18-year-old Allison Bonilla was returning home by bus when she noticed 2 men following her. Scared, she texted her mother and boyfriend, saying she'd run home after she got off the bus. Unfortunately, Allison never returned home that day, and it took about 6 months to find her. Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. Being the only child in the family, Allison lived with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. But Yendri wasn't the only one involved in Allison's upbringing. Allison's grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and Aunt Ziamara, often helped Yendri. According to Yendri, Allison's father left them immediately after she was born. He was in a relationship with another woman who was pregnant at the time. He abandoned his wife and daughter to be with her. He didn't want to be a part of Allison's life. Yendri said there was only one time when he asked to meet his daughter. He had lung cancer at the time, and that was the only reason she allowed him to meet Allison. It's worth saying that his second family didn't even know about Allison's existence until almost the whole country heard about her disappearance. Allison was very close to her mother. She considered Yendri both her mom and her dad. It may seem strange, but she always gave her mother gifts for Father's Day. Their relationship was much closer than the one between mother and daughter. They were best friends who did everything together. Allison could tell Yendri absolutely anything without fear of being misunderstood or judged. Allison had a large family, and although she didn't have a father, she didn't feel lonely or abandoned. She loved spending time with her family and going to church every Sunday. Relatives described Allison as a very kind, outgoing, and friendly girl. She always looked happy in the photos. There wasn't even the slightest hint of sadness or longing in her eyes. Allison has dreamed of working in the modeling business all her life. She dropped out of the 8th grade to take makeup classes because combining school with makeup classes seemed too hard. Allison didn't want to waste time on an education that couldn't help her reach her goals. She soon started looking for a job to help her mother with the bills. Yet, every time Allison would drop off her resume at places, she wouldn't get any callbacks. Yendri saw that her daughter was very depressed about this. Knowing Allison wasn't suitable for any job because of her incomplete education, Yendri advised her to attend night school. Therefore, at 18, Allison enrolled in a school. Liceo Enrique Guerre Sens, located a few miles from her home. While studying at school, she received a certificate of completion of pastry courses and began making cakes. The cakes and other desserts made by Allison were just amazing. Everyone in the neighborhood was delighted with her cakes, so it became a good way for her to earn money. Allison was in a romantic relationship with Harold Segura Solano, who lived in Cachi. Cachi is a district of the Paraíso Canton in the Cartago province of Costa Rica. Allison usually spent the first half of the day at home with her mom. Later, she would meet with Harold and then go to evening school at 6 p.m. Therefore, she always returned home quite late, most often by bus. The path from the bus stop to her house ran through a quite dangerous place. It was a road with a lot of vegetation and an almost complete absence of light and people. So Allison always informed her mother of changes in her location. Sometimes, her mother even met her at a bus stop or the bridge halfway along the way. On March 4, 2020, Allison went to her mom's salon to get a manicure and chat with her. After that, she visited her friend Paula, who studied at school with her. They spent about 15 minutes at Paula's house and then went to school together. They arrived there around 6 p.m. and split up, as both were in different courses. After spending about 15 minutes in an empty classroom, Allison realized that the school had canceled her classes that day. She decided the best way to continue the evening would be to visit her aunt, who lived near the school. Her aunt wasn't home, so Allison decided to spend time with her boyfriend Harold before going home. However, he wasn't home. His mother said he was at work and was supposed to return soon, inviting Allison to the house to wait for him. When Harold returned, they had a big family dinner, chatting on various topics and discussing plans. After a while, Harold excused himself, saying he would be back soon. He needed to leave urgently. At about 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's house without waiting for him to return. This moment was a start of a series of events that the whole country soon learned about. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later, and when he saw that Allison had left, he started texting her. He asked where she was and offered to take her home on his motorcycle. Allison immediately replied that she was already at the bus stop, so there was no need to worry. While waiting for the bus, Allison texted her friend Paula and asked if her cousin could take her home on his bike. He refused, saying his bike was a professional cycling bike unsuitable for two people. It remains unclear why she didn't ask her boyfriend for help. Perhaps she was angry with him or didn't want to bother him. As a result, Allison went home by bus. She got off the bus at about 8:43 p.m. Her home was about a mile away. Allison asked her mom to walk towards her as she had a bad feeling and was afraid. At 8:45 p.m., she texted her boyfriend and mother, saying two suspicious men were following her. They got off the bus at the same stop as her. Therefore, she decided to run home to lose them. As I have already mentioned, the road that Allison was going to run along was quite dangerous. There were almost no lights, and people rarely used it. There was only one surveillance camera there. It captured a blurry spot, which presumably was Allison. When Yendri, Allison's mom, came to the bridge half a mile from home to meet her daughter, she didn't find her. She tried to stay calm, thinking that maybe Allison had returned to the bus stop as a safety measure, but she didn't find her there either. Then she decided that Allison might not have noticed her and was already home. Yet, when Yendri returned home, she found the house empty. Yendri started calling the family and her daughter's friends, asking if they knew where Allison might be and inviting them to join the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up to a phone call from Allison's aunt, Xiomara. She told him Allison was missing. He immediately started calling her, but it was all in vain. Her phone was unreachable. 3 hours later, Allison Bonilla was reported missing after her mother contacted the police. They started a search. Fortunately, Yendri knew how her daughter was dressed, as earlier, Allison had asked to take a picture of her in this outfit. Here's the last photo of Allison. At the beginning of the investigation, the police checked every place from the bus stop to Allison's house. They also examined various locations near the city, including Lake Cachi and the hydroelectric dam of the same name. On March 5, 2020, the police found the first clue. Allison's glasses. They were in the grass a mile from her house, but Allison seemed to disappear into thin air. After another 8 days, they found Allison Bonilla's ID on a coffee plantation. It was strange since they already searched that entire area many times before. Another suspicious fact was that her ID was in a too perfect place, easy to notice. There wasn't any dirt on it, as if someone had deliberately put it there to mislead the investigation or hide some details. 15 days after Allison went missing, Yendri received a call from Allison's father. Instead of offering his help or sympathy, he said that Allison went missing because she was too beautiful. Yendri did not expect such soulless words, so she immediately hung up. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Some time passed, and Allison's family, police, and volunteers continued searching for her nonstop. Every Sunday, they went outside and hung posters with Allison's photo. One day, they decided to paint messages on the street with Allison's steps, from crossing to the bridge, where it's believed she got lost. They painted 7 different messages, and one of them said, "Allison, we're waiting for you." In addition, they put posters on poles next to the road so that those passing by could notice it. At the same time, the police got a crucial lead. A man came to the police station and said he knew Allison and had seen her the night she disappeared. According to him, on March 4th, at about 8:30 p.m., he left the house on his motorcycle to pick up someone. While he was driving, he saw Allison, and he also saw a 2-door wine-colored BMW pull up next to her. He said he then turned around to see what was going on. He realized who the car belonged to. It was his cousin's BMW. It had bright yellow headlights, a distinctive feature of this vehicle. That's why he was 100% sure it was his cousin's car. In addition, another man also told police that he saw the same BMW that evening near the place where Allison disappeared. It belonged to 28-year-old Nelson Sanchez Urania, known locally as Sukia, since, according to the public, he was a member of a local gang. As it turned out, Nelson knew Allison. Their families had known each other for a long time. For a while, they even lived in the same neighborhood. Allison's mom later said she only had one interaction with him. It was just a neighborly relationship rather than a friendly one. One day, Nelson offered Allison and her cousins a ride home, to which she agreed since it was daylight. She was not alone and considered him a decent person. On March 2nd, 2020, 2 days before Allison disappeared, Nelson sent her a Facebook message asking her to answer some questions. On the advice of her cousin, Allison agreed. Nelson then asked Allison how she felt about him. He wanted to know if Allison liked him. Allison was puzzled, as she did not understand the meaning of such a question. They weren't friends, and they hardly knew each other. When Allison asked Nelson why he was asking this, he replied, "It's because I don't think bad of you, but I just wanted to ask you if you thought bad of me." Allison replied that she didn't dislike him, assuring him everything was fine between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. On March 26, 2020, detectives obtained a warrant to search the house and confiscate Nelson Sanchez Urania's car, mobile phone, and computer. His phone contained some very disturbing things. There were a lot of pictures saved on his phone showing the abuse of women. During the search of his car, the police noted the perfect cleanliness in it. As it turned out, someone cleaned the carpet and seats with polishing liquid. Yet, the front carpet of the driver's seat and the trunk carpet were missing. The police found hair and drops of blood on the trunk lid and sent it to the laboratory for analysis. After completing the visual inspection of the car, the police conducted a test with a service dog. It showed possible traces of blood on the 2 front seats and in the trunk of the vehicle. The luminol exam confirmed it. It's a chemical that reacts with hemoglobin in blood cells. Traces of blood, which the owner tried to destroy with cleaning products, were found in many places in the car interior. While the detectives were waiting for the results from the lab, Nelson Sanchez Urania was a free man, but he was under surveillance. They monitored his every move to ensure he did not leave the city or the country. Yendri insisted that the investigators arrest him, but the police had no grounds for this yet, so he remained at large for several months. Yendri thought someone kidnapped Allison to later ask for a monetary reward for her return. She tried to stay calm and not panic. She hoped her daughter was still alive. She left Allison's room untouched. She didn't make the bed. She didn't rearrange things. She also bought gifts for her daughter in case she returned home. "I will continue to do this because until I see anything that proves that she is dead, my daughter is alive and will return home," she told reporters. On September 2, 2020, detectives finally received results from the laboratory, confirming that the hair and blood found in Nelson Sanchez Urenia's car belonged to Allison. The police arrested him on the same day. Later, Urenia's ex-girlfriend told the police that he had never physically harmed her, but there was a lot of moral pressure in their relationship. He did not allow her to communicate with friends or use the internet. According to her, he only wanted an intimate relationship with her. Urenia's former boss said he treated his work irresponsibly and once even stole about $1,000. In addition, they interviewed his landlord, who said that one of Urenia's ex-girlfriends left him because she was tired of paying his bills. She called him a very spoiled man. On September 4th, Nelson Sanchez Urenia confessed what he had done to Allison Bonilla. According to him, on the night Allison disappeared, driving by, he saw her alone, walking along an empty road. He decided to take advantage of the fact that it was late at night. Nelson realized Allison would not be afraid to get into his car because she knew him. He offered to give her a ride, to which she agreed and got into the car, but instead of going home, he turned the other way and took her to a coffee plantation, where he forced her to get out of the car. Nelson hit her so hard that her glasses fell off and she almost fainted. After that, he took her to a nearby abandoned house where he had intercourse with her against her will and then severely beat her. Urenia then took her to the front seat of his car to tie her hands with some cloth and duct tape. Then, Urenia put her in the trunk and drove to a landfill in San Geronimo Cachi. There, he threw Allison off a cliff into a pile of garbage. He explained his actions by using too many illegal substances. He said he was heavily under their influence. He also explained that he was obsessed with Allison. According to him, when he saw her that night, he knew that this was the right moment to realize his obscene fantasies. As is often the case in such stories, Nelson Sanchez Urenia later retracted his confession, saying that the police had put pressure on him, but there was enough evidence against him to bring charges. The maximum sentence he faced was 35 years. Early in the morning on September 4th, the search team went to the landfill in San Geronimo to search for Allison's body, but since the area was too vast and not easily accessible, finding Allison's remains was not an easy task. In addition, 6 months have passed since her disappearance. Only 25 days after Urenia's confession, the police found human bones, vertebrae, ribs, part of the pelvis, a femur, fragments of clothes that Allison was wearing on the day of her disappearance, as well as one sneaker with nails inside. The police sent all these clues for examination. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's lawyer, said the evidence could have been falsified because it was found by a group of volunteer rescuers, not the judicial police. In addition, Herrera said it was strange the authorities had found human remains in the area specified by Urenia on the same day when his client changed his statement and said he wasn't guilty. Bonilla family's lawyer, Rodrigo Araya, criticized the change in the suspect's testimony, saying the incident was a mockery of the authorities' work. On October 5, 2020, the experts confirmed that the remains found belonged to Allison Bonilla. Since the search team didn't find all parts of Allison's body, forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of her death. However, the expert who examined the remains concluded that numerous fractures on her body occurred after death, indicating a fall from a great height. The clothes found were torn, and there were bite marks on the sneakers, so experts concluded it could have been the work of animals, and that is why the remains were in different parts of the landfill. Yendri, Allison's mom, was furious that the police hadn't listened to her and hadn't arrested Urenia earlier. Maybe he would have confessed even earlier, and then Allison's body could still be intact. It was a great tragedy for the whole family. It's an unimaginable pain that I'm going through, but she's in a better place where no one will hurt her, Yendry said. The trial of Nelson Sanchez Urania began on July 19, 2021. One of the witnesses at the trial was Allison's boyfriend, Harold Segura Solano. In his statement, he said Allison was at his house with his mother when he returned from work at about 6:30 p.m. on March 4, 2020. At some point, he left for 5 or 10 minutes. Upon returning, Harold saw that Allison had left without saying goodbye. He kept in touch with her through text messages while she was on her way home. After she got off the bus, she informed him that 2 men were following her. With that in mind, Harold insisted that she should take a taxi. He said he would pay the taxi driver himself, but Allison refused twice and texted him that she would run to her house. He didn't receive any more messages from her after that. However, according to him, he informed only his mother about the situation. He didn't contact Yendry, Allison's mother. He explained that he didn't do it because his phone's battery had run out, and then he fell asleep for 30 minutes. He discovered that his girlfriend was missing from Allison's aunt, who called him. From that moment on, he said he got scared and called Allison's cell phone several times, but all calls went straight to voicemail. WhatsApp messages were also not getting through. Harold indicated that he had been part of the search team for several days, but stopped because he did not feel fit and had to work. No doubt he wanted things to be different. If he could rewind time, he would have taken Allison home that evening, but unfortunately, nothing can be changed. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson Sanchez Urania to 18 years in prison for taking the life of Allison Bonilla. He could have received twice the sentence, but the judge pointed out that there was no evidence to confirm that Urania knew about the path and time of Allison's return home and that he planned to attack her. Moreover, due to the condition of Allison's remains, there was no evidence that Urania had forced her into intimacy. But this is not the end of the story. Allison's family was very disappointed with the verdict. In their opinion, this was not a fair punishment. In 2022, the family's lawyer filed an appeal. The court overturned Urania's sentence and scheduled a new trial. On September 28, 2023, the court sentenced Nelson Sanchez Urania to 35 years in prison. Allison's family's lawyer pointed out that Urania acted wildly, cowardly, and inhumanly, and took advantage of the victim and her loved one's trust. According to the court, Urania's actions were premeditated. Allison had known Urania for several years, so he took advantage of this to commit a crime. Urania showed no remorse, and the criminal court took this into account. Despite feeling pain and anger, the family was happy with the new verdict, which finally closed this chapter of their lives, ending this nightmare that lasted more than 3 years. Allison's family placed a cross and laid flowers where she was found. They made for her something like a small altar with her photo and a statue of the Virgin Mary. The Allison Bonilla case has had a strong impact on Costa Rican media and social networks, even sparking several marches in memory of the young woman and other women who had previously suffered under similar circumstances, such as Maria Luisa Cedeno and Luani Salazar. A link to the story of Maria Luisa Cedeno should now appear on your screens. Where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into 2 opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdez could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never crossed that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, they simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdez was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for, as the couple eventually parted ways in 2011. As a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Munoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana let into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental, and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, he would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection. But Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half-naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece. First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body, while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter, highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder." Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, but above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was let out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Carolina Gutierrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. It was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of two children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Molina Cooks case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists seeking to attract attention to their publications even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Molina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBarre was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBarre? Sheila LaBarre was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBarre, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazoot filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, At the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch LaBar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, LaBar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and LaBar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LaBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating, or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later, this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon, Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Jack. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click on the bell not to miss